Have you ever found yourself staying in a relationship long past its expiration date? Clinging to the hope that love could overcome all obstacles, even humiliation, self-doubt, and diminishing self-worth? This story is not just about a man and a woman. It is about the deeper struggle for dignity, self-respect, and the realization that true worth does not stem from external validation. It is about the sacrifices we make in our relentless quest for belonging, and the painful lesson that sometimes walking away is the only way to reclaim ourselves. The beginning, a love that felt like a second chance. In the beginning, everything felt like a dream come true. After years of solitude, he stumbled upon a woman who made him feel as if he had been given a second chance at life. She was vibrant, charming, and spoke words that felt like warm sunlight piercing through the cold walls of his self-doubt. She showered him with compliments, telling him he was strong, capable, and wise. Her admiration felt like a balm to his soul, rekindling a sense of vitality he thought had long since faded. For the first time in years, he saw himself through a different lens, not as an aging man, but as someone still worthy of love and passion. He found himself eager to please her, willing to bend over backward to maintain her gaze of adoration. He treated her like a queen, believing that her presence in his life was a rare gift he had to cherish and protect. The cracks in the foundation. As the days turned into weeks, subtle cracks began to form in the perfect facade of their love. At first, they were minor, small remarks disguised as playful teasing. "You should take better care of yourself," she would say, her voice laced with what seemed like concern. "A man your age shouldn't be struggling with things like this." He laughed it off, brushing aside the unease creeping into his mind. But the comments didn't stop. They became more frequent, more pointed. What began as gentle suggestions soon evolved into persistent criticisms. Her words carried an undercurrent of superiority, a constant reminder that she was younger, more energetic, and more desirable. He started to feel the weight of her words, their echoes lingering in his mind long after their conversations ended. She began reminding him, sometimes subtly, sometimes bluntly, that he was too old for her. Each time, it felt like a slap, a harsh reality check he didn't want to accept. The erosion of confidence. The most devastating blow came in the most intimate aspect of their relationship. What was once a source of connection and closeness became a battlefield where his masculinity was constantly under scrutiny. "You're slow," she said one night, her words sharp as knives. "Predictable. I need more than this." She compared him to younger men, something he could never compete with, no matter how much effort he put in. It wasn't just his body she critiqued, but his very essence as a man. Yet, in the same breath, she would occasionally throw him a lifeline, a moment of approval, a reassurance that no one else could love her with the same dedication and care he did. But these reassurances were laced with mockery. She laughed at his efforts to please her, calling them desperate. She manipulated him with glimpses of warmth, just enough to keep him hopeful, to make him believe that if he just tried harder, he could win her over completely. The invisible chains of manipulation. Despite everything, he stayed. He convinced himself that love required patience and sacrifice. He believed that if he endured long enough, she would finally see his worth. But love, when poisoned by manipulation, has a way of binding its victims with invisible chains. It wasn't just her youth or beauty that kept him tethered. It was the hope she represented. He wasn't just fighting for her approval. He was fighting to reclaim a piece of himself that he had lost. The tragedy of his story is that it is not unique. How many of us have stayed in relationships that drain us, simply because we believe our love can fix what is broken? How often do we diminish ourselves, hoping that our sacrifice will be enough to make someone see our value? The breaking point. One night, After yet another argument that left his heart heavy and his spirit bruised, he retreated to the sanctuary of his room. He sat in silence, the weight of the evening pressing down on his chest. Every word exchanged replayed in his mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. Standing before the mirror, he took a long, hard look at the man staring back at him. A 70-year-old man gazed into his own tired eyes, tracing the deep lines on his face. Those wrinkles were not signs of failure. They were markers of a life lived, of battles fought, of love given and sometimes lost. His graying hair and weathered features told the story of decades spent growing, learning, and surviving. Yet, in that moment, he couldn't help but feel that somewhere along the way, he had been reduced to less than he was. He had allowed someone else's opinion to overshadow his sense of self-worth. The realization hit him like a wave. He had reached his breaking point. The liberation, choosing himself. That night, he made a decision, one of the hardest yet most necessary decisions of his life. He would walk away, not because he no longer loved her, but because he had finally learned to love himself more. The next morning, he packed his things. She barely reacted, as if she had been expecting it all along. There were no grand gestures, no pleas to stay, just a smirk, a dismissive glance, as if he had finally played his part in her game and was no longer of use. He walked out the door, not with a sense of loss, but with a quiet strength. He felt lighter, as if he had shed a burden he had been carrying for far too long. For the first time in years, he was not seeking validation from someone else. He was reclaiming his dignity, his self-respect, and his own sense of worth. The wisdom that comes with letting go leaving wasn't just about ending a relationship. It was about breaking free from a cycle of self-betrayal. It was about realizing that love should never come at the cost of self-respect. He had spent years chasing an illusion, but now he was ready to embrace the truth. He took long walks alone, rediscovering the simple joys of solitude. He reconnected with old friends, finding comfort in conversations that weren't laced with judgment or manipulation. Most importantly, he learned to enjoy his own company, to appreciate the man he had become rather than mourning the man he once was. A lesson for us. All his story serves as a powerful reminder that no relationship is worth losing yourself over. Love should uplift, not diminish. It should build confidence, not erode it. And most importantly, it should never be rooted in fear, fear of being alone, fear of not being enough, fear of walking away. If you take anything away from his story, let it be this: you are enough. Your worth is not determined by someone else's perception of you. The moment you start compromising your self-respect to keep someone else happy is the moment you've already lost more than you realize. The power of self-love. A journey of rediscovery. Self-love had to rise above all else. It wasn't arrogance or selfishness, it was survival. He could no longer live as though his worth depended on the validation of someone who refused to truly see him. For too long, he had shrunk himself to fit into a world that had no room for his experiences, his wisdom, or his heart. But something within him stirred. An unshakable realization that if he didn't take a stand for himself now, he never would. So for the first time in years, he made a decision purely for himself. It was terrifying yet deeply necessary. The next evening, with a mixture of trepidation and resolve, he sat down to talk to her. He approached the conversation with a calmness he didn't know he possessed, looking her directly in the eye as he spoke. He explained how he felt, how their relationship had slowly chipped away at his confidence, and how he could no longer endure being treated as if he were invisible or inadequate. He told her, in no uncertain terms, that love should never come at the expense of self-respect. No matter how much he cared for her, no matter how deeply he had hoped things would change, he could not continue down this path. If staying meant sacrificing his dignity, he was prepared to walk away. The pain of letting go. The conversation was as painful as it was liberating. She dismissed his words, brushing them off as overreactions or dramatics. In the past, her dismissiveness would have shattered him, making him second-guess his feelings. But not this time. He stood firm, not in anger, but in the quiet strength of knowing his worth. It was a bittersweet moment. A part of him mourned the end of what they once had, while another part celebrated the beginning of something he had almost forgotten, his own self-respect. As he walked out of the house, he felt a strange mix of emotions. There was sorrow, of course. Letting go of someone he had loved wasn't easy. But there was also relief. A heavy weight that had pressed down on him for years seemed to lift. For the first time in what felt like forever, he could breathe freely. The air felt lighter, his steps less burdened. He realized that he hadn't just walked away from her, he had walked toward himself. The loneliness that followed, the days that followed, tested his resolve. Loneliness crept in, wrapping itself around him like an unwelcome visitor. The nights were especially difficult. He missed the presence of another person in the house, the sound of a voice, even the simple comfort of shared silence. But as the days turned into weeks, he noticed something remarkable. This loneliness, while difficult, was different. It wasn't the hollow ache of being unappreciated or unloved. It was a quiet, dignified solitude that allowed him to rediscover himself, reconnecting with his true self. He began to reflect on his life, not with regret, but with gratitude for all he had endured and learned. He remembered the younger version of himself, full of hope and dreams. That man was still there, buried beneath years of trying to please others. Slowly, he began to reconnect with parts of himself he had long forgotten. He reached out to old friends, people who had known him before he had started losing pieces of himself. He dusted off hobbies he hadn't touched in years, finding joy in the simple act of creating and exploring again. One day, he stood in front of the mirror, but this time he saw someone different. The man staring back at him was not defined by his age or his wrinkles, but by his resilience. Every line on his face told a story of triumph, of survival, of love given freely and without regret. Every gray hair was a testament to the wisdom he had earned. He no longer saw himself through the eyes of others. He saw himself as he truly was, a man of value, of strength, of infinite potential. Embracing a new chapter. As the months passed, his world began to bloom in ways he hadn't expected. He traveled to places he had only dreamed of visiting, immersing himself in the beauty of new experiences. He found joy in the smallest things: a sunrise, a good book, the laughter of an old friend. He realized that his worth had never depended on the approval of anyone else. It had always been there, waiting for him to claim it. He learned that true love, the kind that accepts, respects, and values, starts from within. The love we give ourselves sets the standard for how others should treat us. And as he moved forward, he carried this lesson with him. Life was too short to spend proving his worth to someone who refused to see it. Aging wasn't about loss. It was about uncovering what truly mattered. And what mattered most was that he had found peace, not in someone else's arms, but in his own heart. 5 key lessons on love and self-worth. 1. The illusion of youth. No matter how tempting it may seem to relive the vitality of youth through a relationship with someone younger, it's essential to stay grounded in reality. Youthful energy and charm can be alluring, but they are not substitutes for genuine connection and respect. Many people find themselves investing time and energy in someone who cannot truly appreciate the depth of who they are. This often leads to feelings of inadequacy and frustration, as the desire to prove oneself becomes a trap. 2. The danger of compromise. Love should never require us to sacrifice our core values or accept treatment that diminishes us. Yet the fear of loneliness often drives people to tolerate situations they would have never accepted in earlier stages of life. It's crucial to remember that love is not a battlefield or a test of endurance. It should be a sanctuary of mutual respect and understanding. 3. The importance of self-love. To be loved fully, we must first learn to love ourselves. This means embracing not just our strengths, but also our vulnerabilities, our flaws, and the scars life has left behind. Self-love is the foundation of every healthy relationship, and without it, we risk losing ourselves in the pursuit of another's approval. The power of integrity. A person's worth is not defined by their age or their ability to conform to societal expectations, but by their integrity and resilience in the face of adversity. This integrity is what transforms the challenges we face into symbols of strength and wisdom. 5. The freedom of letting go. Walking away from a relationship that no longer serves us is not a sign of failure. It is an act of self-preservation. Sometimes the greatest act of love we can show ourselves is the courage to leave behind what no longer aligns with our growth. Final thoughts. This journey of self-discovery serves as a reminder that love, in its truest form, is not about clinging to someone who refuses to see our worth. It is about embracing the person we are, fully, unapologetically, and with deep reverence. For those in their later years, this story holds a powerful lesson. Every wrinkle, every gray hair, every scar tells a story of resilience, wisdom, and a life well lived. To sacrifice that wisdom, to deny the dignity that comes with age for the fleeting approval of another, is to lose sight of the richness of one's journey. True love, whether it comes from a partner or from within, is always built on a foundation of mutual respect, appreciation, and authenticity. The gift of reflection, a journey to self-worth. Every relationship, no matter how difficult, is an opportunity to learn and grow. Through pain, disappointment, and even loss, we can uncover profound truths about ourselves, truths that shape our understanding of love, self-worth, and personal boundaries. For this man, his relationship became a mirror, reflecting not only his vulnerabilities, but also the resilience he never knew he possessed. At first, he believed that enduring harsh criticisms in the name of love was an act of noble sacrifice. He thought that patience and perseverance were signs of strength, that absorbing another person's judgment without retaliation was proof of his deep commitment. However, as time passed, he began to realize that what he had accepted as selflessness was, in fact, the gradual erosion of his dignity. Each dismissive remark, every unfair judgment, chipped away at his self-respect. He had mistaken endurance for devotion and silence for wisdom. Love should uplift, not diminish. Love should never demand that we abandon ourselves for the sake of someone else's happiness. Instead, it should inspire mutual growth and respect. This realization was one of the most difficult but transformative lessons he learned. Loving yourself, he discovered, is not just an act of self-care, it is a moral obligation. Without self-worth as a foundation, a person risks allowing others to define their value. And when one forgets their worth, they open the door to being mistreated, taken for granted, and ultimately disrespected. For years, he had operated under the belief that love required sacrifice, that putting someone else's needs above his own was the truest demonstration of affection. But he learned that love is not meant to deplete you. It is meant to nourish. True love should not leave you feeling hollow, invisible, or diminished. Instead, it should fortify your sense of self, making you feel valued, heard, and seen. Choosing strength over comfort. The hardest yet most crucial turning point came when he finally gathered the courage to say, "Enough." Walking away wasn't merely an act of defiance. It was an act of liberation. It wasn't just a breakup. It was a declaration of self-respect, a refusal to be diminished any further. It was the moment he reclaimed his life. Solitude, which he once feared, became his refuge. It wasn't a punishment or something to dread, but rather a sacred space where he could begin the process of healing. In the quiet of being alone, he discovered an undeniable truth. The peace that comes from self-respect is worth far more than the fleeting comfort of a dysfunctional relationship. The healing power of solitude. For the first time in years, he experienced what it meant to be enough for himself. In solitude, he found the space to rebuild his self-esteem brick by brick. It became a time of reflection and renewal, a period where he could explore his desires, values, and dreams without the weight of someone else's judgments. He realized that being alone isn't something to be feared. It's an opportunity to rediscover the parts of yourself that were lost in the shadows of someone else's expectations. He embraced the journey of self-discovery, understanding that he had been conditioned to associate solitude with loneliness, when in reality it was the path to true freedom. Aging as a badge of honor. As he navigated this chapter of his life, he began to see aging not as a loss, but as a gift. Society often glorifies youth, placing it on a pedestal as the pinnacle of beauty and vitality. But he came to understand that the marks of time, wrinkles, gray hair, and even the slower pace of life, were not signs of decline, but badges of honor. Each line on his face told a story of perseverance. Every gray strand symbolized wisdom earned through experience. He no longer wished to mold himself to fit someone else's shallow standards. To do so would have been a betrayal of the rich, complex person he had become. He learned to take pride in his experiences and to embrace his story, with all its flaws and triumphs. And in doing so, he found a new sense of freedom, the kind that comes from no longer seeking validation from those who cannot see your worth. The balance of giving and receiving. One of the most profound lessons he learned was about the balance of giving and receiving in relationships. Love, he realized, cannot flourish in a one-sided dynamic. Physical closeness, emotional connection, and genuine acts of care should never feel like obligations, nor should they be met with indifference. True intimacy thrives on mutual respect, understanding, and the acknowledgement of each other's efforts. He had once thought that his unwavering dedication was enough to sustain love, but he came to understand that no matter how deeply one cares for another, love cannot be sustained without reciprocity. His gestures of affection, no matter how sincere, needed to be valued for the connection to thrive. Walking away was a beginning, not an end. In the end, walking away was not the conclusion of his story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where he no longer needed to prove his worth to anyone because he had finally recognized it himself. Through the pain of letting go, he found a strength he didn't know he possessed. He found peace not in someone else's approval, but in the quiet certainty of his value. Life, he realized, is too short to waste trying to please those who fail to appreciate the depth of who you are. The greatest love story, he discovered, is the one you write with yourself. As he looked back on his journey, he felt no regret, only gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons, for the pain that led to growth, and most importantly, for the chance to rebuild his life on a foundation of self-respect and authenticity. What this means for you. Life is a journey of lessons, growth, and rediscovery. What we have shared today is just a glimpse of the profound truths that shape us. Now it's your turn. What resonated with you the most? What lesson from this story will you take into your own life? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share one thing you've learned and plan to practice in the comments below. Your insights could inspire others on their journey as well. If you found value in this message, let us know by leaving a comment, liking this video, and sharing it with those who might need to hear it.